am so happy to be here. We had a week off, but now we're back with another edition of Raw Talk with the DocRocker. I'm Jeff Manolo, and I am joined once again by the DocRocker himself, Danton Arlotto. Danton, what are we doing today? What are we talking about?
Tonight is the night that we slay the dragon and climb the mountain. Today we talk power metal.
Power metal!
Yes, it's gonna be awesome.
I fell in love with this genre back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I mean, I have to say, like, there's a ton of really terrible generic power metal out there right now. I kind of like, I don't love it as much as I used to. But like anything, you know, you have to find the cream of the crop. And I think that's what I'm here to do, is to give out the cream of the crop, what I think as far as like what are the best power metal bands, best albums, you know, or for people who don't really know what power metal is. There's a couple people on our Facebook group didn't really know what we were talking about. They're like, I have no idea what power metal is. So there's going to be a little education, a little genre talk, a brief overview pretty much, because I mean, we could get really deep into this.
So I think, Jeff, you're going to definitely have a lot more to say about it than me, because I really don't know a whole lot of power metal. So I guess I'll start us off with kind of breaking down the genre as best as I understand, and then you can kind of fill in maybe all the gaps of whatever I'm lacking here.
Well, let's define power metal first before we hit the history, because you'll be surprised. Like, I found, at least how I feel, that power metal started a lot earlier than the 80s.
Okay. Well, that's good. I didn't know that. So that's I'm going to be learning just as much as any of our viewers here. So musically breaking it down.
Protopower.
Oh, okay.
Proto, you know, it's like, it really came into its own in the late 80s, I'd say. But like, there's some stuff in the 70s that we really need to touch on, because it really influenced what we're even hearing now, you know. And it's going to go back to a lot of the same names that we've been talking about on these Rock Talks. A lot of the same names as far as bands go that, you know, they're pulling, you know, these ideas from, you know, these different bands from the 70s, really. But first, the meaning of power metal. What power metal actually is, as far as the interwebs is concerned. Power metal, subgenre of heavy metal, combining characteristics of traditional heavy metal with speed metal, thrash metal, and often within a symphonic context. Generally, European power metal is characterized by faster, lighter, more uplifting sounds and a frequent use of keyboards. Power metal bands usually have anthem-like songs with fantasy-based subject matter, strong choruses, and that thus creates a theatrical, dramatic, emotionally powerful sound. Now, American power metal is a little bit different. It tends to be darker sounding and takes more influences from thrash. That's pretty much what I've found out from searching around today.
Okay. So yeah, from the few power metal acts that I follow, some stylistic characteristics include high operatic vocals, you know, most of the time with a male singer, but there are, you know, I could think of the symphonic metal band Nightwish that features a female singer. So definitely, like, you could tell a lot of these power metal singers are classically trained, because the way they sing is even a little different than some of like the new wave British stuff. You know, there are a lot of stylistic parallels you could draw between new wave British and power metal, but I think power metal, and like you said, it's got more of like, a lot of the time it has more of a fantasy focus in its lyric content, you know, so, you know, slaying dragons and knights and castles and princesses and all that kind of cool stuff. You know, it just bleeds Lord of the Rings, you know, it's that kind of stuff. Trolls,
it does.
Goblins, and swords and all that kind of great stuff. So yeah, definitely more symphonic in nature, and I think a big part of that is because of the keyboard. Not dominance, but like really, really substantial presence, you know, like string synths and brass and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I would venture to guess that some power metal bands are featured in tandem with live symphony orchestras. Does that ever happen?
Oh yeah, like especially the symphonic power metal bands, like you mentioned, Nightwish. Mm-hmm. A lot of those bands, and even like as you look at the catalogs from, like, say, Rhapsody, mm-hmm. Symphony, by the time they hit their album Symphony of Enchanted Lands Part 2, they had an orchestra behind them a lot. I'm not sure how they reproduced that live, but on
Maybe
the album, there's a lot.
with a track, probably. Or
Who knows?
sometimes, some bands actually tour with an orchestra. It happens. It's rare, but it
So,
happens.
like, the money, it's
Yeah.
the money because you got to pay those guys. But yeah, a lot of those bands are. Some people don't even want to call them power metal bands anymore, and I'm lumping all this in together. Okay, there's like subgenres of power metal, just like your subgenres of everything. You got your neoclassical power metal, which takes from classical musicians and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And you have your progressive power metal, which is power metal with a lot of prog elements. And then you got your symphonic power metal, which is a lot of symphony stuff and orchestration and stuff like that. That's all power metal. It's all power metal to me. So it's like, you don't want to split hairs. Is Nightwish a power metal band? Sure they are.
Okay,
Symphonic power metal, but okay. Yeah, so I don't want to split hairs, but yeah, there's a lot of this orchestral stuff that just kind of goes hand in hand with what they're doing, especially like you said, there's a lot of Lord of the Rings fantasy elements and sci-fi, and they're taking a lot of stuff from literature,
Yeah.
So let's step back and let's go to the proto power metal stuff, because this, I think, is, you're gonna see, if you take a listen to some of this stuff and some of these bands, you'll see where it comes from. And I always thought, this is where it really started. Ronnie James Dio and Richie Blackmore. The
Rainbow?
first 3 Rainbow albums. Yeah. Richie Blackmore's Rainbow in 75, not as much, but once you hit Rainbow Rising and Long Live Rock and Roll, you have songs like Stargazer, A Light in the Black,
Man
Kill
on the
the
Silver
King,
Mountain.
Man on the Silver Mountain, Lady to Lake, Gates of Babylon. Like, that's, to me, that's the earliest examples of power metal, especially that song Kill the King. I mean, that's just a power metal song right there. I mean, it's fast.
Mhm.
It's about killing a king, and there's a fantasy element there. So lyrically, vocally, and musically, I believe a lot of the blueprint for power metal comes from Rainbow and Richie Blackmore. And you can't forget John Lord from Deep Purple.
Yeah.
His keyboard playing, is very reminiscent of what the power metal bands do now, like how he plays the keyboards.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if John Lord is classically trained. I would bet that he is, just hearing from his playing, because yeah, he's a really great rock keyboard player, but he also employs like really good, like traditional 18th century common practice period conventions as far as how he voices his chords. It's like something you could rip straight out of a Bach suite. For those who don't know, Johann Sebastian Bach being one of the definitive keyboard composers of the late Baroque era, which dates into like the early half of the 18th century, and like this really like traditional 18th century European, what's called counterpoint, as far as like individual moving lines to create harmony, and you can stem a lot of that in John Lord's playing, even just stuff he does with Deep Purple, and a lot of that stems into the later acts that, like stuff like Rhapsody and Nightwish, things we're talking about that have like that really like there are so often parallels drawn between a lot of heavy metal styles and classical, and naturally because of like the virtuosic nature of the playing and the symphonic nature of the song's form, especially the longer, like more progressive kind of stuff. But to a trained ear, a classical musician can tell by listening to various metal acts which metal acts have classically trained musicians and which ones don't, because it's really easy to imitate, but it's difficult to properly duplicate as far as following all of the conventions properly. And a lot of times from some of the examples of power metal that I've heard, the best example, I guess maybe the strongest example of which being Rhapsody, now known as Rhapsody of Fire. You could definitely tell that those musicians are classically trained.
Yngwie Malmsteen is a perfect example of someone who took that neoclassical approach to guitar playing, and he's always cited. And when you read articles about power metal musicians and their influences, it goes back to Yngwie a lot too, because he pioneered that kind of neoclassical guitar playing in the heavy metal genre. As far as vocals go, I'm gonna have to give it to Rob Halford for the vocal delivery, because he sings up in that really high register. And plus the twin guitar sound of the two guitar players and Judas Priest. There's usually two guitar players that are doing a similar thing in a lot of power metal. So you got to count them as,
again, drawing the parallels,
big influence. And of course,
yeah,
I'm you know where I'm going.
I know exactly where you're going, and I'm
Next
right behind
on the list
you.
Is Iron Maiden.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even Rhapsody of Fire has a cover of Flash of the Blade. Yeah.
Almost every power metal band they've done a Maiden cover at least once. I mean, I'm looking at the list of albums, like power metal albums that I want to talk about, or bands that I want to talk about. I'm like, okay, I've heard them do a Maiden cover. I heard them do a Maiden cover. It's almost like you can't separate those two. Iron Maiden is, like the godfathers of power metal, along with a few other bands, and the Maiden's at the top right there. There's a couple other things that really I think influenced was he looked like He-Man, and he sang metal. That's where a lot of these power metal bands got that look. And I have to mention Manowar. I'm not a huge Manowar fan, but the American band Manowar, with their mythological sword and sorcery kind of look, they played on stage in loincloths. So you have to mention Manowar. I mean, they're more traditional heavy metal, but the look is complete power metal. That look,
they have definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, it looks a huge part of it. But yeah, that's where I feel pretty much that's where it came from. And then, of course, 1987, the blueprint for all modern power metal came out. Halloween's Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 1, followed in 1988 by Part 2. I don't want to argue with anybody about that, because I don't think you can put up an argument about where power metal came from, because, well, we'll talk about this later. That was your assignment for the last 2 weeks, was listen to these albums, and I'm sure you could see where power metal really started. Really started was with those two. I consider them the first power metal albums, complete power metal albums, compared to like the proto power metal that you find like in a couple songs by Rainbow and Judas Priest and so on. But so there's the history up until the big power metal explosion of the late 90s, I'll say.
Yeah.
But what else do you enjoy when you listen to power metal? What do you enjoy about it? Like, to me, it's a great songs to drink to. They have this like happy drinky feeling. It's like you want to grab a beer and put your arm around your brother and storm the castle,
smash the tankards together, storm the castle. There's definitely a sense of brotherhood. Like you mentioned in the wiki definition, there's a kind of anthemic quality to the choruses. These like really nice, kind of simply structured melodies that are really catchy and easy to sing along to, which makes for great live show experiences for fans and the musicians alike. I think one of the other defining factors, 90% of your power metal is fast. It's got to be really fast. You want to get that sensation that you're galloping on horseback into battle. So a lot of times you get that galloping rhythm, especially the gallop that Iron Maiden is so well known for. That eighth note to 2/16, bum, 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 that kind of thing. It stems into lots of power metal as well. And in fact, I was exposed to power metal before I got into Maiden. And like when I first heard, a bunch of selections of Maiden's greatest hits, it was like, these guys kind of sound like a power metal band. And that's really cool. And I really like that. So yeah, operatic vocals, fast galloping rhythms, and your drummers have to be able to do double bass. Like it's one of the defining characteristics of power metal. You want to have that real like fast thumping thunderstorm going on underneath the surface there. Not to say that the drumming is really overly complex, because a lot of times it isn't. It's quite simple in rhythm and structure, but it's difficult to do. It's virtuosic in nature. It's athletic. I like to use that word a lot. Yeah, I like to use athletic to describe a lot of things in music, especially like when I'm teaching. I talk about athletic playing quite a bit, especially as a piano player. So there's definitely an athletic nature to power metal, not entirely, you know, and sometimes you could also draw some parallels between it and things like folk metal, you know, a lot of times, you know, like passing down, you know, the kind of like the bard with the lute, you know, telling a folk story, and even a lot of times in really big power metal albums, you'll have these moments that kind of tone things down, and like, here's just an acoustic guitar and I'm going to do this kind of this epic whisper storytelling kind of, you know, like Greek epic kind of thing sometimes.
Right.
So
No,
yeah, storytelling
understandable.
qualities are definitely part of it, you know, and a lot of power metal albums are concept albums, right? You know, so this idea
Right.
that you have like a kind of through line from start to finish, not that they don't all have to be, and that's something I wanted to ask you about Keeper of the Seven Keys. Is that kind of like on the first impression, I didn't get that like every song was interconnected. Are they? Does it
No,
tell some kind?
no,
Okay, so it
no.
doesn't always have to.
The last song, as far as I know, the last song on each album connects. Halloween on the album, Keeper of Seven Keys Part 1, connects with the song Keeper of Seven Keys. They're kind of connected.
Okay.
That's about it. The rest of them
they're all kind
really
of standalone. Yeah, I got the feeling that a lot of them were just standalone tunes, and I
Yeah.
liked that about it. It was a nice kind of like, all right, go from one thing to the next, and it's like a solid metal album, and it's great. So, yeah, but a lot of times in power metal, you'll get that storytelling component as well. You know, a lot of times, and again, tying this back into classical writing styles of this idea of like a multi-movement symphony. You know, and sometimes a lot of power metal albums will have like that. You know, this is movement 1, movement 2, movement 3. You know, sort of 3 to 4 movement structure for a lot of their like more ambitious songs will really tie back to a lot of those 18th century conventions of the classic period.
One thing I want to mention, you were talking about like storytelling, like and that's a huge part, but it doesn't only have to be fantasy. Like it could be there's sci-fi, a lot of sci-fi
like futuristic kind of stuff.
And
it can kind of go anywhere. There's a reason it's not called fantasy metal, you know.
Right. Another thing I want to mention is folk metal is it's very similar to power metal.
You could draw a lot of parallels, just like new wave British.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels. I mean, it's like I said again, it's you're splitting hairs sometimes with some folk metal bands.
That could really easily be put in the power metal lineup for a concert.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And some power metal bands, a lot of power metal bands don't just stick with the guitars, the keyboards, the drums. They sometimes, a lot of times anymore, they'll add a fiddle or violin player,
or a bodhran,
an accordion player, in,
drum, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they'll add in all kind of like crazy instruments, all kind of like weird stuff,
bagpipes, accordions. I think of bands like Protopower a lot. Yeah.
Some of that stuff it's borderline power metal. Again, with these subgenres and stuff like that. You're saying heavy metal, then you're doing a subgenre heavy metal, which is power metal. Then you're breaking that down even more to a point. It's metal. Sometimes it's like, okay, it's metal, whatever. But there is a difference between American power metal, what we called power metal, and what Europeans call power metal. There's a big difference in sound. And I wasn't super aware of it until more recently when I started reading up on this, and I'm talking like in the last couple of years. People are calling bands like Iced Earth and Metal Church power metal, and I'm like, okay, so I got to look this up. I got to look, So I'm looking into this, and a lot of American music journalists started calling these bands power metal back in the 90s because they were powerful. Sabotage is another one. I know Sabotage is probably, what they turn into is not one of your favorite things to talk about, but we are going to talk about it. Sabotage, they turned into TSO, Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
The original Trans-Siberian Orchestra was pretty much all the members of the band Sabotage. I love Sabotage. And, I'll say this about TSO. They're a symphonic power metal band. There's no two ways about it.
Oh, yeah,
that's what they are. I don't care what you listen to it and it's like, yeah, that's power metal. Now we could save that for another discussion about what you think about TSO, or we could tackle it right now if you'd like.
I'd like to save that. We could save that for one of the hot take episodes. We'll do like a short series of hot takes where I talk about really famous or popular stuff that I just don't care for
Yeah,
much at all, and I can kind of give my reasons why and my insights and perspectives into why I think certain things might be really overrated.
I love what they originally were. I love Sabotage. I think Sabotage is a fantastic band. If you want to check out some good American power metal, Sabotage is a good place to start. Like Hall of the Mountain King, Gutter Ballet, Edge of Thorns, 3 great albums there. Sanctuary is another one labeled American power metal. Into the Mirror Black is a great album by them from the 80s. Iced Earth, of course, Burnt Offerings, Dark Saga, Something Wicked, This Way Comes, 3 great albums by them. And Metal Church, one of my personal favorite. Now, I just figured they're a metal band. But on our Facebook group the other night, someone said, "No, they're a power metal band." Okay,
I'll totally
all
buy
right,
that. I mean, I saw them
I'll
live when
buy
they
that.
opened for Megadeth,
Yeah.
and they definitely gave me some power metal vibes with their performance.
2 great albums by them, Blessing in Disguise or The Human Factor. They're all good examples of American power metal. Everything I just listed there. European power metal, Blind Guardian, have to mention them. Nightfall, you talk about Tolkien. They have an album called Nightfall in Middle Earth. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
I have not.
I'm not fantastic.
I'm sure it is.
It is fantastic. It's really good. The singer does a lot of layering with his vocals, which just add to the epicness. There's all kind of interludes and there's like dialogue and stuff, and you hear like, people fighting and stuff and the swords clanging and it. But the songs are good too. Like the whole album's it's really good and it's
musically
fast.
solid.
Yeah. They're Blind Guardian. When I introduce someone to Blind Guardian, I always say start with Nightfall and Middle Earth. Cool thing about that is the singer from Blind Guardian and the guitar player from Iced Earth, they do a side project called Demons and Wizards. So it's like you get the best of European power metal and American power metal and clash them together. It's pretty good stuff.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Check out Demons and Wizards. That's cool stuff too. They got 3 albums, I think. Like I mentioned before, Halloween Keeper, the Keeper albums. Stratovarius is another really good power metal band. They don't get as much credit anymore as I think they should. They started like 1984, but they really started sounding like a power metal band around 97, I'll say. The album Visions and there's another album called Infinite. Really, really good albums. And
that name is interesting. Stradivarius, for those of you who don't know, it's the most famous violin maker in the world. So again, a direct tie to classical music.
I believe the name came from Stradivarius and Stratocaster, like a combination of
like blending rock with. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
There you go. Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
a cool little trivia there. Love it.
Yeah, and then the last one I want to mention that's like pretty much straight power metal is Gamma Ray. Gamma Ray was the one guitar player from Halloween, Kai Hansen. It was his own band. 2 albums to check by them is Insanity and Genius and Land of the Free. 2 fantastic, very power metal albums that aren't boring. Like that's the thing. Like I'm listening to these out. I'm saying these albums because they're the ones I remember that
they take you for a ride.
Yeah, because a lot of power metal, like I said in the beginning, man, a lot of it started to sound the same. I'll go back to one that you mentioned, Rhapsody of Fire. They're called now. I'm not sure why they're called Rhapsody of Fire now. I know there's 2 different Rhapsodies.
Yeah, there was some kind of like legal issue with the namesake, and I think they were violating some kind of trademark for something else, so that it ended up kind of turning into a thing. And they said we're just going to change the name and make it Rhapsody of Fire.
Yeah, they're not the same band as they were though, because I checked them out recently. In this past week, I've been listening to a lot of power metal, but that's. Who cares? I'm not even going to go into that really. Rhapsody of Fire, whatever you want to call them.
I usually refer to them as Rhapsody.
This is probably the one that you heard, the Symphony of Enchanted Lands 1 and 2. If I had to pick one, I'd pick the first one because that's less orchestral. The second one has what's his name? Christopher Lee does this big long monologue, and I think it's actually kind of cool though that after Christopher Lee did this voice work on Rhapsody's album, Christopher Lee at like 89 years old at the time went off and made an album, a metal album.
Made a metal band, yeah, and he fronted it, didn't he?
Yeah.
That's insane. I love that so much.
Yeah, I hope when I'm 89 or so, or however old he was, I hope I could sing in a metal band.
I'm not even sure I could sing in a metal band now.
No, not like that. But you know, it's I don't know if you ever heard. I think it was called Charlemagne. Have you ever heard it?
No, it's one of the like I should, you know, it's one of
No.
those things that I've heard about, and I was like, that sounds amazing. I really got to check that out, and I just never did. So
It's interesting. I mean, he has a deep voice, but you know,
is
he
he
can
on
carry a
Spotify?
tune, it probably is. Yeah, just look around for it. Yeah, it has to be.
Hmm.
Um,
If not, I'm sure I could
Another
YouTube
band I
it.
want to mention this band's American actually, but they don't play American power metal. They play European power metal. They're from Florida. It's Camelot. Everyone in the band is from
Oh yeah,
America except for
Camelot's great
Camelot is fantastic.
because
Yeah,
they
I'm pretty sure like
integrate that style so perfectly. They sound
yeah.
just like the European acts. Oh
But
man,
yeah, I didn't know
incredible.
they're from Florida until my buddy Jake was like, "Yeah, you know." He did a couple shows with them. I think he worked on their tour or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how he knows them, but I know he knows some of them. And we had discussions like, yeah, they're from Florida,
That's
but
really cool.
their,
I
their
never knew
singer
that.
Roy Khan. Well, the singer I know by them, he's Finland or something. He's from somewhere in Europe, but those three albums I like the best by them: Karma, Epica, Black Halo. Now their new singer's just as good. His first name's Tommy something or other. I haven't had a good listen to their newer stuff, but it's along the same lines. It's probably pretty solid.
Mhm.
Of course, we can't not mention the most popular power metal band,
Oh yeah, which
Dragon Force.
yeah, Dragon Force is one of those bands that like I've always kind of purposefully avoided because
Yeah, me too.
my first foray into power metal was Rhapsody, and like I discovered Rhapsody like right at the same time I discovered Dream Theater. And here's like these two like, oh my god, there's these metal bands that have keyboard players. That was completely unheard of for me at the time. I was like 10, and like wow,
Yeah,
there's these amazing keyboard players, and what is this power metal thing? What is this progressive metal thing? And I fell in love with both of those genres immediately. And for me, like like Rhapsody will always be my favorite, and not just because it's my first. I think musically they are the most solid and they give me the most of what I want in power metal. So I always equate any new power metal band I discover against
yeah.
Rhapsody, which is probably not fair because a lot of bands are great in their own right, even if they don't sound like Rhapsody. And even bands that would sound exactly like them should probably still do something different anyway. But yeah, for me, like, and like right as I was going through my teens and like the whole Guitar Hero craze came and went, and of course, Through the Fire and Flames, you know, the big Dragon Force famous hit that was featured in the game, and like every guitar player wanted to learn it. And that was when I first started teaching, and of course I had a bunch of students that tried to learn that, and I'm like, I can't even play it, let alone teach it. It's really difficult. But it
Yeah.
was one of those things where I just kept kind of getting them shoved in my face, and it was like, screw Dragon Force. I hate them. I don't like that band at all. Sure enough, I saw them live at one of the Mayhem festivals. They were one of the they were like one of the opening acts of the final set. I forget. Was it the one when Slipknot headlined, or was it the Marilyn Manson one? I forget. But I saw them play, and they actually gave a really terrific show. And I thought, oh, you know, these guys are actually not so bad. They're much better than I thought they were. And I probably should give them a proper listen. They're probably a proper power metal band, and they're probably really good. So I've always avoided them, you know, because I kind of had that like bad rap of them just always being shoved
Yeah.
down my throat. So it's one of
Well, I
those
think
things.
that's why. Yeah, they get a lot of shit. I think from the Guitar Hero
Yeah,
days.
which is probably a shame. You know, again, they're probably solid artists that have great output, and there's probably a lot of really great music that I just never got into by not checking them out. So they're
Well,
definitely
yeah, how familiar are you with the next band on my list, Nightwish?
bits and pieces, little bits here and there. What I've heard, I love, absolutely love. Um, the first song by Nightwish I ever heard was Moondance. I'm not sure what
Mm-hmm.
album that's on, but that was like, whoa, what is this band now? There's symphonic metal. What is this? Oh my god, you know. So and of course, you know, the really famous Wishmaster is one I'm also really familiar with.
Yeah, that whole album's great.
Yeah, I think that's the first full album by them I listened to. I only listened to like 2 or 3 of their albums, and I know they have a couple different, singers and stuff and different lineups and kind of complicated history. It's kind of like Maiden with like, different guitar players, different singers, all that kind of thing. But
Nightwish you should check out more of them because number one, the keyboard player is the band leader, basically. He's the guy who writes most of it. He's, as far as I know, he is the brains. Wishmaster is a great album. Once is a great album. Now, they just released a new one. I didn't hear it yet, but the one they released in 2015 called Endless Forms Most Beautiful is a fantastic album. And that's the first one with their new singer, Floor Jansen. They went through 3 singers. Taria was their first one, operatic,
yeah, she's the one I'm most familiar with. I know her.
Yeah, she's the one that was on Wishmaster and the real classic Nightwish stuff.
Yeah,
she's great. She's a great voice.
Yeah. That was a big part of why I love
singer,
I never really heard great metal bands with female singers before, so that was just a really cool, unique, novel concept for me, and I fell in love with it right away.
They're one of my favorites as far as like the symphonic power metal goes. I really like Nightwish. Their second singer wasn't as good. She didn't have the right voice for it. She had more of a pop singer voice. But the third singer, Floor's great. Floor is perfect. She does both. She could do both very well. She's a great vocalist. I'm gonna tell a real short story about Nightwish and I was talking to somebody about Nightwish during a gig the one time. It was like a all day long benefit gig. So there was a bunch of bands playing, and I was at the Ramada Inn, I think. I was standing outside getting some air, and there was this young girl who was performing there during the day. Because like I said, it was a whole day thing. So
yeah, like
the
a
band was
telethon or something like that.
Yeah, it was a fundraiser for someone who had cancer. There's this young girl there, and she just was playing piano and singing. She already performed. She was there, and her father was next to her, and she was really good. And she loved that Amy Lee girl from Evanescence.
Oh, Evanescence, yeah,
like, that was her
great
thing.
singer.
Yeah, that was her thing. This is how long ago it was. They were like the hot thing. Okay. So long ago.
This is like early mid 2000s, maybe.
Yeah, this girl's probably already grown up and divorced or whatever. But anyways, she overheard me talking. I was talking to another musician about Nightwish because I just started listening to them right around that time. So it had to be a long time ago. And so I was like, okay, I was talking to this guy about Nightwish, and this girl was like, who's this band you're talking about? Because I'm like, oh, the vocalist is great, blah, 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 blah. And this girl's like, who are you talking about? And I said, oh, I'm like, you would like this band because they kind of look like the guys from Evanescence. They kind of look like Amy Lee with that gothic thing going on, but they're a lot better. They can actually play their instruments better, and they're more.
It's a lot more intricate and sophisticated.
Right,
not to knock Evanescence, their music is great, but it is definitely really simple by comparison to a lot of the power metal.
Right. I told this girl about Nightwish, and I told her a couple albums to listen to. I'm like, yeah, go on, get yourself Wishmaster. I said, tell your dad to take you up to the record store and buy Wishmaster for you or something. And the dad leaned over. He goes, I don't want to talk to my daughter anymore. And I was like, well, I was just suggesting some songs. She likes Amy Lee. This girl sings like Amy Lee. But, he's like, no. He's like, he was something like, we have her career planned out already. She's going to be the next Amy Lee. She doesn't need your Nightwish.
Oh,
and I was like, how about that? How about that? I would love to see this girl. I would love to see this girl again and be like, yo, did you ever check out Nightwish? Yeah, screw my dad. I checked out Nightwish. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that's what happened. Hopefully she found the.
What's that?
Hopefully that's what happened.
Oh yeah. I'm sure.
So.
Yeah, it was really weird. Like the guy was like, "Don't talk to her about Nightwish." I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I
don't know.
That's really weird.
It was so odd. But every time I think about Nightwish and stuff, and I talk about vocalists and stuff, I think back to that day, and I'm like trying to get the youth of America into some European power metal, and the dad was like, "Oh no,
broaden horizons, open minds, exposed to different forms of arts, that you because you're not going to find that stuff anywhere around here unless you're looking for it actively. So
especially not back then, especially not back then. Yeah,
this is before Spotify and Pandora. We're ourselves greatly.
We had Napster. I
Oh,
think
God.
that, or maybe Audio Galaxy.
LimeWire.
Rhapsody.
All the old
LimeWire.
FrostWire.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
geez.
maybe that's why Rhapsody had changed their name, because of the file sharing service called Rhapsody. I remember
That
that one.
might very well be part of it. Honestly, I remember it was something really stupid like that, though. It was some kind of thing just over the name, and they were like, "All right, we're just Rhapsody of Fire now because that sounds more metal anyway, and we're just gonna re-record all." The best recommendation I can suggest for anyone who's trying to get into this stuff, if you want to use Rhapsody as your starting point, if you look up Rhapsody of Fire on Spotify, they have like this grand compilation where they re-recorded a whole bunch of their stuff that they did under their previous name. I forget what
I
the
didn't know
name of the
that.
compilation is. It just came out the last couple of years, maybe like 2017, 2018. Like I said, I forget the name off the top of my head, but it's got like Holy Thunder Force on there, like all that stuff.
Emerald Sword.
Like, yeah, Emerald Sword is on there. It's all
That's a great song.
I think it's all re-recorded by the new members, and it sounds spot on to what the original is, but it's got even better sound quality because it's brand new. It's great. It's a sizable collection. There's like 18 or 20 songs on it. It's huge.
Oh, nice.
It's like an awesome sample platter of all things Rhapsody of Fire and all things power metal. It's fantastic.
Definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a good go-to.
I do want to mention two strange power metal bands that I know of. I mean, there's a bunch of them. Power metal is a strange thing to begin with, but there's two strange ones. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Northern Kings. They were a Finnish symphonic supergroup made up of a bunch of different guys from different power metal bands, and they do power metal covers of pop and rock songs. Some of them are horrible. Some of them are good. They're all interesting. Let me say that. They just reimagine all these pop songs from the 80s as power metal songs.
That's funny as hell. I love that.
It's interesting, to say the least. And of course, I don't know if you know of Van Kento, the German a cappella metal band, 6 singers and a drummer.
No.
They do metal covers of like Maiden songs and Metallica songs. There's one song
that's very cool.
It's all a cappella. That's it. All except for the drummer. There's a real drummer that plays along with them, and 6 singers. They do a couple. They have a couple of original albums out. The best song they have is called "The Mission." If you want to check that out, it's interesting. It's not something you can listen to all the way through. I can't listen to a full album of that, but it's interesting to say the least. And they're all great singers. And there'll be like 3 people singing, and the other 3 will do the instrumentation. They'll hum the bass line, they'll hum the guitar line. Mm-hmm. So when they do metal covers of like Maiden and Metallica, they're singing into guitar riffs. It's kind of funny, but they're able to pull it off live. And I've seen video of them at the Wacken Open Air Festival, for instance. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Wacken. That's correct. Yeah, because the W has a V sound to it. It's German.
Oh. Because I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. I'm not sure. So
yeah, well, it's Americanized. You get a lot of Wackens out there that'll say it, but it'll make any purist cringe when they hear someone say Wacken.
Well, that is on my bucket list someday to get there.
I'm going with you.
Absolutely, man. I would love to. The Wacken Open Air Festival is not going anywhere. I mean, it's been held annually since 1990. It's been going on, and it's one of the largest now. It's one of the largest metal festivals in the world, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I go, I'm going for the whole week. But
I mean, you have to. You can't just go for part of it. You have to really, really go nuts.
I mean, if I'm flying to Germany, I'm staying for a while.
Yeah,
that's a long flight.
Yeah. So really quick, that Rhapsody album, I just looked it up. It's called Legendary Years. Came out in 2017, and they just put a new album out last year called The Eighth Mountain that I didn't know about. So I'm gonna definitely check that out later.
I'm pretty sure that's a different singer though.
It might be
because they're split into they're split into 2 bands now. Luca Turilli's Rhapsody, I believe, is the one with Luca Turilli on guitar.
Yeah, the guitarist.
And the singer Fabio Leone. Mm-hmm. That man has beautiful hair
and a beautiful voice. He's one of my favorite singers.
He does.
He has an awesome.
He is a great vocalist. And
super clear, super clear. You can hear every single word he says. It's awesome.
He stepped in to sing for Camelot for one tour when the
Oh,
singer
really?
Roy Khan had Roy had he had like a nervous breakdown and like Fabio Leone stepped in and he did a whole tour with Camelot.
Holy crap.
Unfortunately, there is no good video.
Of course.
No good video of it. I can't find. I looked because I wanted because that guy, he's one of my favorite vocalists. Both of them are. Roy Khan's an excellent vocalist. Fabio is a fantastic vocalist too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's a great vocalist, and that's another thing I really like about power metal. They all
There's a
have
lot of great singers.
great singers, and that's one of the things I really love is a really good singer.
Yeah, it's definitely a good genre for like someone who's not like super into metal. If you want to start checking it out, instead of doing like the really, really heavier stuff, power metal is a great kind of way to ease yourself into it because it's really light and it's really clear and it's really, really melodically driven, more so than
it's usually
a lot
very
of other
positive.
Genres. Yeah, positive, uplifting messages. It's not like black metal or doom metal where it's all like the world is over and I embrace the sweet kiss of death. It's not really so much of that stuff. It's more like raise your glasses, raise your swords, go fight the dragon. It's great.
I like to listen to it in the fall and the winter. I really like to listen to it in the fall and the winter.
Definitely get through long drives too. It makes you feel like you're going on a quest. You're instead of driving your Subaru, you're riding on the back of a mythical creature, and
there you go.
You're like going off to Hogwarts or something. You're doing something really epic and cool and magical and enchanted.
Is there any power metal bands that do any songs about Harry Potter? I wonder. There has to be.
I would love that. If there's got to be like a Harry Potter tribute metal band out there somewhere. Named after one of the Hogwarts houses or something.
They better be a power metal.
If anyone knows about it, let us know. Post a video of them playing or one of their songs
I would love it
because I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I would go nuts for that kind of music.
There's one more power metal band I want to mention, and we just scratch the surface with it because there's so many. Even in that post we made in our group, there were so many power metal bands I didn't even hear of that people were posting. And that were really good. The one guy posted Sonata Arctica. For some reason, I never really listened to them, man. But I listened to a couple of their tracks last night.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I got to go back and check them out. But the band I want to mention is Angra, a Brazilian power metal band. 2 albums by them, Angels Cry, Holy and Holy Land. Both of them came out a long time ago, like in the 90s, early to mid 90s. The reason why I want to mention them specifically is because the guitar player from that band is now in Megadeth. And if you listen to Megadeth's newest album, the one that came out a couple years ago, Dystopia, you can hear the little bit of the power metal influence in it from this guitar player from Angra. His name is Kiko something or other. Again, I'm not going to bother with his last name because I will mispronounce it. But his first name is Kiko. So
that's
you
easy
can hear if you go back and you listen to Dystopia by Megadeth, you can hear the stuff. You can hear the parts that are Kiko, because they sound a little bit more Celtic, a little bit more power metal-y, a little bit more neoclassical, I'll say too.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
you can even hear that in his soloing,
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's another one. Definitely. Angra's a decent band. The production on it's not that great. It does sound dated a little bit. The singer was good. The singer just passed away, I think, a year or two ago. He was pretty young, actually. But yeah, Angra, they had a bunch of albums, but those two, I think, Angels Cry and Holy Land are the only two I'm really familiar with. They were pretty good at the time. I haven't listened to them in a while. I'm talking like years. Mm-hmm. But they're, again, like I mentioned, because he's in Megadeth now. Oh, one more. Avantasia. I think that's how I'm pronouncing it. I think I'm pronouncing it right. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, fine. That is that's like a rock opera supergroup kind of thing. Basically, the guy named Tobias Sammet gets a whole bunch of power metal guys together and he writes a rock opera. It has maybe 7 or 8 albums, and it's all these different vocalists, all these different musicians from all these power metal bands. He's had the guy from Queensryche on there, the dude from Halloween. I think he's had some people from Nightwish. He's just had a bunch of different musicians. It's really interesting stuff. Again, we're going back to the whole rock opera concept album thing. Always a concept to it. It's really neat. It's great great power metal. It's real classic power metal stuff. And it's still going strong. I think the last album he put out was last year or 2 years ago, something like that. But I think a new one's coming soon. It's good. Somebody on our group posted about it a while back that we should talk about them. All right. Sum it up. If someone wants to listen to power metal, tell them what they should expect and where they should start, my man.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's a real obvious. I will always point anyone and everyone to Legendary Years by Rhapsody of Fire. That's like for me, that's the definitive power metal album. Even if it's a compilation or like a greatest hits kind of thing, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think so, but it definitely has pretty much everything that power metal has to offer. You get the symphonic stuff, you get the fantasy stuff, you get the operatic vocals, you get the twin leads on guitar, you get a lot of keyboard playing, you get virtuosity across the board with every member of the band. Even the bassists are doing like crazy shredding stuff. And it's upbeat, it's fast, it's fun, it takes you on an adventure, literally. And it's definitely worth checking out. So I would point someone into that. That's my go-to power metal band, but that's just me with my limited experience with the genre. I know for me, like I've been taking notes as we go here. I always keep a little notepad on my desk and I write down bands that either if I know a little bit about them and want to know more, stuff like Rainbow, stuff like Nightwish, like bands that I'm familiar with, but I don't know all their stuff. And it's like, all right, I definitely got to delve a little deeper into their discographies, as well as, looking at some of these bands that I've not ever tried, like Charlemagne or Stradivarius. I've been keeping tabs, and I always do every week on things that I should be listening to and try to check out. And the list just, as always, just keeps growing and growing by the day. So hopefully your list is growing for all of you viewers, and you're finding new stuff to check out, and hopefully you're finding new music that you're super into. And if that's the case, feel free to share stuff you find on the Rock Talk page on Facebook and let us know what you're listening to.
For me, any of the albums I mentioned for the American power metal, which like I said, it was born out of like the new Wabam stuff and the thrash metal, or the European power metal stuff that I mentioned, Blind Guardian, Halloween, Gamma Ray, Stradivarius, Nightwish. There's good albums to be had in all of them. I'm actually going to check out the Rhapsody of Fire compilation that you talked about, because I didn't know that existed. So I do like some stuff. Symphony of Enchanterlands 1. I like stuff from Symphony of Enchanterlands 2 also, but not, it's like kind of mix and match with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, not as much. But the first one, the Symphony Part 1, I really, really like that. And I just revisited that this past week, which is great, because I just listened to power metal pretty much all week, and I did my homework, of course.
Right.
But if you're not really familiar with the first 3 Rainbow albums, man, when you go back and listen to them again, especially like the songs that we mentioned, "Kill the King," "A Light in the Black," "Stargazer," "Lady of the Lake," "Gates of Babylon," stuff like that. Especially the second 2, like Rainbow Rising and "Long Live Rock and Roll," they are like they're power metal songs. Especially "Kill the King," man, that's just such a power metal song. It's just crazy. I love it. And that's I actually was listening to "Long Live Rock and Roll" on the way home from work today. I had to throw it in, and just to hear, because it's been a while, just to hear "Gates of Babylon," man, good stuff. And Dio, man, just hearing that voice, oh man, just gets you. Yeah. So that's my thing. I love power metal. Power metal makes you want to have a beer with your buddies and just do the whole tankard thing and sing.
Climb a volcano.
Fight a dragon, of course, fight a dragon.
Maybe you're gonna do it in space.
Some of it, and there you go. Dragons in space on a volcano. That's fine. Some of it, like I said, is a little generic. Not anything that we mentioned. I think we pretty much picked the cream of the crop here, which was great.
Yeah, a lot of the best selects.
Some of it starts to sound like video gaming music, like Dragon Force.
That's what I loved about it. Yeah.
But
funny enough, going back to the Dragon Force concert, they actually opened with this whole like Donkey Kong Country showcase where they like showed gameplay from the Super Nintendo game, like on the backdrop.
That's cool.
They played a bunch of stuff and then they went into their act. It was crazy. It blew my mind. I was like, wait, these guys are just totally a bunch of gamers, and I love that. And I really should give them a fair listen. Yeah, I'm gonna add them to my list because like I said,
you know what? I think that I have whatever album the Through the Fire and Flames is on, whatever album that is, I have that somewhere. But I can always just pull it up on Spotify, Amazon Music, or whatever
Yeah,
I'm using
whatever
today.
platform you're doing.
So let's move on to our homework. This is the part of the show where we get to talk about what we listened to this week. We each give each other an album to listen to. Now, we had 2 weeks for this, and I gave you 2 short albums that kind of go along with what we were talking about here today, power metal. I gave you what a lot of people call blueprints for modern power metal. I gave you Halloween Keeper Part 1 and Part 2. So we should start with you because we're still talking power metal.
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll get to what you gave me, which was Kansas Somewhere to Elsewhere. So let's start with you.
So
tell me about Halloween.
Yeah, so the Kansas album was more or less a follow-up to our last assignment where I assigned Jeff Freaks of Nature. So I figured let's kind of go along that same line and do an album that came out after that and kind of give hopefully give Jeff a little bit more of some more of what he liked from Freaks of Nature is present on Somewhere to Elsewhere. So the thing I like a lot about our 2 listening assignments each week is that we're always doing stuff that we haven't really heard, or at least haven't heard in a long enough time that we're just not really familiar with it. In my case, I have no prior background exposure to Halloween. So I jumped in not really knowing what to expect. I wasn't so sure if my assignment was based on the fact that we were doing a power metal talk or if it was just a kind of happenstance kind of thing. I know Halloween is, Jeff, one of your favorite bands, so I kind of jumped in with a little bit of that power metal expectation. And it definitely delivered. Truth be told, I didn't totally love it. I wasn't as impressed as I thought I was going to be by it. I guess I kind of set the bar high for myself in my head. There were some like the further along I got, like definitely Part 2 was better for me than Part 1. Like the further along I went into it, the more I liked it. I think just musically for me, it fell flat in a couple of respects. I like the singer's voice. I like his range. I was really impressed with his range. He has a really nice, consistently high range, but I don't like the way he sings. There were a couple of just things about his singing technique that I had an issue with. The way he pronounces things, the way he sings his rhythms. I found that he had a kind of lack of a kind of through line. I kind of felt like every note was placed and it sounded like kind of muscled and forced, and it just didn't appeal to me vocally. Can
I tell you why?
Sure, go ahead.
Let me stop you and tell you why he sings like that on those 2 albums. He was singing, from what I remember, now I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, at least on the first one, he was singing English phonetically.
Is English not his first language?
No, they're a German band.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. They're from Hamburg, Germany. He was 18 when they recorded the first Part 1.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm pretty sure he didn't know English. He knows it now.
Well, that perfectly
explains
how he sang it. In that case, it's commendable. It's a job well done.
Yeah.
It sounds like perfect English. He's pronouncing everything correctly. Lyrically, I didn't feel like it delivered too much for me either. I was kind of trying to key in. I know lyrics are never really my thing, but I was trying to kind of key in. I figured there was some kind of overarching concept behind the whole thing, and that of course also wasn't true. Each song was kind of a standalone thing. Some of the songs came off as a bit generic. It's like, I've kind of heard this before, things like this before, and I'm just not super all about it. Like I said, there were a couple of songs that made me go, ooh, yeah, this part's really nice. I remember there's a song about eagles, like the Eye of the Eagle or Eagle something.
Eagle Fly Free.
Eagle Fly, yeah. So that one was really cool. I really enjoyed that one. That was kind of where the album started to turn around for me, and the songs that followed after that were a lot better. Generally speaking, I didn't care too much for the longer stuff, like Halloween and Keeper itself, the title track. I saw the runtimes and thinking, oh, cool, this is like a 13-minute song. It's going to be this big epic journey. And kind of wasn't for me. It kind of felt like it was just kind of like a collection of a few different song ideas, and kind of like, all right, I'm going to hear this, this meat and potatoes part of the song twice. And then Like, yeah, there's like a couple bits of like spoken text toward the end of Keeper itself, you know, and like the, you know, like the demon falling back into earth, and I was expecting more like give me like really evocative imagery, and it really didn't do that for me, so I was kind of disappointed by it. I mean, like I said, the musicianship is great, you know, the playing is really good, the drummer is tight, the guitar players are tight. There's a I think it might have been in that Eagle song, there was like this really cool like bass flourish feature where like there's all this like crazy bass playing that was really, really technical and really fun. And there were a lot of moments like that, like little kind of interspersed musical moments that kind of caught my fancy. And I was like, oh, okay. It's definitely not something I'm going to revisit. I know Halloween is one of those bands where like not all their albums, stylistically, they vary greatly. So I'm definitely curious to see like what else they have to offer. So if there are more assignments you have for me in the future, I'll gladly take them on. But I really don't think I'm going to revisit Keeper. I mean, I liked it. I listened to it start to finish. Yeah, I mean, I skipped like the remix tracks and stuff like that because it's like, all right, I already heard this song. So,
Oh yeah.
but yeah, I gave it an ear, and I liked it. You know, I would give it maybe like a 6 out of 10 if I had to like review it. But that's just my particular tastes. You know, I was comparing it to like the more grandiose symphonic stuff of what I was expecting from something like
Right.
Rhapsody or Nightwish, and I didn't quite get
Right.
that. But now understanding the background and context of this is like one of like the prototypical power metal albums before all that stuff came, it definitely commands a lot more respect on that front of like, all right, it's kind of the first of its kind, and it served as a really good template for acts that would follow in the future.
Yeah, and that's how you have to look at it. You have to look at it through that lens, especially with you. And we talked about this before, kind of like you start off when you're listening to something like you start off with Rhapsody and then you went backwards, you know.
Yes.
So if you start off with Rhapsody, you see what it is now. Okay, you see that genre how it is now.
Yeah, kind of
Going
fully
back, you see
evolved.
how simple it was. It's the same kind of thing when we talked about like prog rock.
Mhm.
Like you're starting at the top, you know, at the modern part with Dream Theater, and you go back and listen to Rush, you know. But you got to
Yeah.
always realize like there's parts of Rush that Dream Theater uses, just like there's parts of like Rhapsody and Dragon Force and Camelot. These parts that originated with Keeper Part 1 and Part 2. And you say Part 2 is better, and I agree. I love Part 2 way more than I like Part 1. It may be because that's the first thing I ever heard by Halloween was Part 2. But I could totally understand going back now, hearing it for the first time, thinking, well, okay,
Yeah.
it's all right.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, it's just all these other bands just kind of built on that structure. You know, like Eagle Fly Free is your prototypical power metal song. It's so fast, and there's all this, you know, these breaks, and there's a drum break, and there's a bass break, all this crazy stuff, soaring vocals, you know, and
Yeah.
all
I
these
also
other
really
bands.
enjoyed March of Time. That was another one that had a really nice chorus that I thought was really, really catchy.
Well, here's a cool thing about March of Time. If you want to see something really impressive, again, Michael Kiske, the singer, was 19 when he recorded that. There's a recording of him. I'll send it to you. Singing it like 3 years ago at an outdoor festival, and I'm telling you, man, he's hitting all the notes still.
That's awesome.
You know,
Very cool.
30 years later or whatever. You know, the guy can still
It's
sing.
high.
And
It's high singing. It's some of the
really,
highest
really,
I've ever heard.
yeah.
But it's not like too high.
Yeah,
Though. You know, it's not like some of like the hair metal stuff that like they just go beyond the stratosphere just because they can. This was the notes were exactly where they needed to be. They were as high as they were because they had to be, and I thought it was really well constructed. Yeah, and this is one of those cases where I can kind of tell that these guys aren't properly classically trained because there's a lot of like, you know, harmonies like in the twin leads and in some of the vocal multi tracks. Some of the harmonies don't work for my classical brain, you know, the way I was taught traditional harmony. So there were a lot of moments like that that made me like, oh, I'm not crazy about this. That was another big part of it, I think. But vocally, it's definitely an impressive feat. There's definitely a lot to be heard on this album.
I think pretty much what you just said to me is exactly how I thought you were going to feel about it. Like it's okay for what it is, you know, it's good for what it is. And you know, like, and you got to remember back in 88, 89, there was nothing out there like this. You know,
Yeah.
now you throw a rock, you could hit a power metal band because of the internet. But this was really groundbreaking back then. But I could see now, yeah, I knew it. I knew it exactly. Your reaction was going to be almost exactly how I thought it was going to be, which is fine. I expected that. But you know, it's like this was a perfect chance. Since we're going to talk about power metal, a perfect chance for me to say, okay, you know, here you go.
Here's the blueprint.
Here's a power metal album. There are a few silly songs. I'm surprised you didn't even mention the silly songs. Like Rise and Fall is a goofy, stupid
yeah, see, those ones,
song.
those are the ones that were like the low points for me, and I was just like, meh, not really into it.
Yeah.
So some of those songs didn't even sound like proper power metal. They sounded more like kind of like trashy, like, you know, hair metal kind of stuff, like these, you know, like something you'd hear like in the late 80s from like a, you know, like a real crappy band. You know, I just some of those songs I was like, these songs don't really have much of a place on this whole like keeper of the seven keys and light your candles and break out your lute. Like I was expecting a lot more of that kind of like fantasy storytelling kind of stuff, and I got stuff like Rise and Fall and was a little bit off put by it.
Yeah, it's Rise and Falls is something that has to grow on. You have to, you know, you have to really like the band, like that song.
I'm sure it's a guilty pleasure for fans if you're into it, you know, and if you love it, all power to you. You know, it's your thing, but it's definitely not my thing.
It's goofy. It's goofy. Well, I'll move on to my assignment, which was Kansas somewhere to elsewhere. Released in the year 2000. Now, this is stuff I had to find out. I actually did a little deep dive on this album to figure out the background of it, to kind of try to understand where they're coming from. This album marks the reunion of the band's original lineup for the first time since 1980. Audio Visions was the last time this group was together as is. My first impression, nowhere near as good as the other Kansas albums. Nowhere near as good as
that was my first impression.
New one. The new one blows this away.
The
new one that just came out. Oh my God! I don't even think this is nowhere near as good as Freaks of Nature. Freaks of Nature I really liked. This one is mainly pop oriented. It's mellower. It's keyboard heavy. It just felt poppier. It felt almost like they were being safer, too safe. Opening track Icarus 2 starts the album off though. Really, really good. I really like that song.
Yeah. That's
now here's a weird connection. It has a pretty classic sound. It has a pretty classic like Kansas sound, but there's moments of like Mannheim Steamroller in there. That's what I'm hearing. And I'm talking like the Fresh Air series, not as annoying Christmas stuff. It just felt like Mannheim Steamroller. I was hearing Chip Davis. Now I like Mannheim Steamroller, but I don't like Kansas to sound that mellow, and but there was some neat guitar stuff going on. There's little guitar thingies that go on in that song, which is really cool. So I like that one. Grand Finale was cool, fun play. It was a fun playing with a good, decent, like different kind of groove to it. Distant Vision was probably my favorite song. That reminded me of like classic Kansas, more so than anything else, really. But I'm still surprised to know this was a reunion album, because it seemed that this album misses the mark more than it impresses me. And there's this weird hidden track at the end too.
Oh yeah, I don't even bother with the hidden track at the end. I always think that. I
didn't know it was there. It scared me. But you know what? Overall, it is Kansas, so it's not actually bad. You know, I could listen to it. It just there was nothing as interesting or as proggy as I would want it to be. Like,
yeah, you're not going to get that.
They've done all this stuff before. Yeah, they've done this stuff before. Everything on this album sounds like something they've done before better. That's kind of how that's it. That's
I can respect that.
I probably won't go back to it.
My first impression of it was kind of more of the same. It sounds like they got old, you know, and like kind of lost their luster. and I kind of wrote it off as like a really forgettable album. And I was talking with my teacher, the late great Matt Magasco, who was a big fan of this album, surprisingly enough. And I remember, we were talking about Kansas albums, the one day, and he got into it, and he was like talking, like he was like doing this whole big thing about how he really likes Somewhere to Elsewhere, and he thinks it's really cool, and it's got a lot of really great moments in it, And Kerry Livgren, of course, the original writer for all their '70s stuff, like wrote the whole album, and it's really really deep and thoughtful. And I remember sitting there and kind of talking to him, thinking like, I don't really remember much of that album. I thought it was kind of a kind of dead, dry, forgetful kind of thing compared to their more colorful stuff. But I ended up revisiting it several years later, recently. This is like maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point. I popped it back in because I have the album. I have like the hard copy of it. So I put it back in, and there were some moments that like totally floored me. Like, wow, I don't like the opening track. There's that really cool like heavy guitar breakdown in the middle of Icarus 2 that like, whoa, this is like along the lines of like Freaks of Nature, kind of like, this is like really cool, heavy, like dirty, like grungier kind of Kansas stuff, and I really like that. Myriad.
That's what I was expecting. I was expecting more of that.
Yeah. Like for me, like the moments, the moments are few and far between, but the moments that do get good are really good. The songs like Myriad, I really enjoy. That one I really really liked. What's the other one? Not Man Big has this really cool kind of like slow, sludgy, heavy kind of thing. And
that's like the last one. That's the last track.
Yeah, that one I really like. Aside from
that was pretty good.
I really don't like the rest of the album at all. And I actually I forget who that guest singer is on Grand Finale, but I'm really not a fan. I tend to skip that track when I do the album proper. I usually go, that one's pretty popular. That's like one of their, it's one of their well-known songs. A lot of Kansas fans like Grand Finale, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's like, it kind of has that like kind of crappy poppy kind of thing. It's a little more reminiscent of what they did in the 80s than it is reminiscent of what they did in the 70s. And anyone who knows me knows I'm partial to the 70s stuff because it's a lot more wacky and diverse and colorful. And the 80s stuff, they went for a lot more of a kind of pop thing, which is fine because they have a lot of great songs that they wrote in the 80s, and a lot of fans kind of attached to that whole decade and that output from Audiovisions on. For me, I did all of those albums once and that was it. I was like, nah, going back to the 70s stuff. Let me put in Point of No Return. Let me do Left Overture. Let me do the self-title. Even the self-title has amazing content on it. Death of Mother Nature and like all this. Anyway, but yeah, for me, like I wanted to see what you thought of it because there are moments that are pretty reminiscent of Freaks in Nature, and I was hoping you'd get a little bit from it. And if nothing else, it's like, hey, it's another Kansas album that you probably haven't heard all of, if any of it.
No,
it's different.
I've never heard that album before. Now, I'll say this though again about Freaks of Nature. I'll go back to that. I probably won't revisit this. Now, you're right. There are some parts in this album where I was like, "Ooh, that's cool. Ooh, this is great." But
some moments are awesome, but those are scattered pretty.
Overall, it's too mellow. Overall, it's just too mellow for me.
I think it's really low key.
And when I compare it to Freaks of Nature, which is did that come out? That was the one before?
Yeah. Freaks of Nature was 95, and then Somewhere Else was 2000. And then nothing until Prelude Implicit in 2016.
And that's what I was comparing it to. Compared to those two
albums. Oh, yeah. Don't compare it to
the Kansas albums I've
listened to. Stuff blows it out of the water.
That's all I got, man.
Yeah, that's all I got, too. So I'll rack my brain and come up with your next listening assignment. And then I'll trust you'll do the same, and then we'll plan another talk for next week.
All right, sounds good, my friend.
Yeah, well, those of you watching that follow the channel, thank you so much for tuning in for another week of Rock Talk with DocRocker. Stay tuned for more to come. The next couple weeks, we're going to be doing probably all the way up until Christmas. We'll be doing a few more episodes, and keep the conversations going on the Facebook group. We love seeing all the feedback. We're still looking for more subscribers, so click that button. You don't have to go so far as smashing the bell and doing all that other stuff. Just give us the sub. It really helps. And then we'll keep the content coming, and then we'll take it from there.